Alrighty, guys. Good morning. Hope everyone's having a nice day so far. We're about to have a nice history lesson today. We're joined for our part two with Mr. Michael Wilson. Our first episode, guys. That show is going to be linked in the bottom. Please watch it if you've not watched this. They're two separate episodes, but the first one was great. It's strictly SOG oriented. Today, as you already know, Mr. Mike served at CCC with RT Arizona, but after his two tours with CCC in Vietnam, he ended up down in Africa with the Armed Forces of Rhodesia. And today we're going to be learning a little bit about not only the forces he served with, but Rhodesia as a whole. So I'm looking forward to it, and no better than a person who served there and operated there. So, Mr. Mike, the floor is yours, sir.
Okay. First, a little historical context. Cover 1,000 years or so in a couple of minutes. The Bantu migration had come from West Africa through Central Africa, hooked south, and had moved down, had passed through Rhodesia, and the first interface between whites and Bantu Africans really was at Blood River when the Zulu and the Afrikaner column, the truck column, met. I think it was 1837. But anyway, the Zulu were the predominant nation in southern Africa, and one of their indunas or lords slash regimental commanders had broken off, offended Chaka Zulu, which was not a wise thing to do if you want to live very long, and took his regiment and their families and headed northwest out of Zululand through Botswana and into what is now Matabele land in southwest Rhodesia. And during this, these people didn't half step. During this, what they call the Infantry, they destroyed every living thing on a 30-mile wide swath to slow down Chaka Zulu's troops who were pursuing them and who had to live off the land. So anyway, they became, although the minority force, they became the very dominant force in the area. There was another tribal grouping or nation, if you want to call it that, the Shona, an amalgam of a whole bunch of sub-tribes. In fact, when I was there was something like 20 Shona dialects. So, but the whole thing was controlled at whenever they wanted to by the Ndebele, Matabele Nation, Ndebele people, and they spoke Sindebele. So they went out every year and collected prisoners wherever they needed, slaves and whatnot. And in 1890, the first whites came to Rhodesia. They were a column sponsored by Cecil Rhodes and the British South Africa Company, and they set up a settlement in what became Fort Vic, and Fort Victoria. I'm not sure what it's called at this juncture. So most of the cities and towns in Zimbabwe have been given African names now or reverted to their African names. So in 1890, they got there in 1890. They've been there for several years. In 1893, the Ndebele arrived to collect some prisoners, and it got a little bit dodgy. You know, they were playing catch with the Shona babies on their spears and all this, which quite upset the wives of the settlers, who said they really had to do something about this. And this touched off the first Matabele War in 1893. The Matabele then were under the control of a king named Lobengula. He was pretty soundly beaten. This is pretty good historical records of all this. And things settled down for a couple of years. In 1896, there was a second Matabele War, but this included elements of the Shona. There was I'm forgetting the name of this charismatic figure who kind of united everybody. But then things settled down pretty much to white rule, supervision, whatever you want to call it. It became a very prosperous and functioning place. In 1933, they were given self-governing colony status by the British government. And around 1950, they became part of a three-nation state with what became Malawi and Zambia. Zambia was then the crown colony in northern Rhodesia, and Rhodesia or Zimbabwe was the crown colony of southern Rhodesia. Anyway, the winds of change were blowing across Africa, and they were really, the whole initial transition to black rule was pretty disastrous. The worst probably being the Congo, where when they were given independence, they had something like under 24 university trained people in the entire nation. But the whole thing had been a disaster, and the whites who were running southern Rhodesia at the time said no, they were not going to just immediately hand it over to unprepared blacks. And so the British government said, well, you must. And they said no, and they declared what is called they made a unilateral declaration of independence headed by the Rhodesia Front, which was led by Ian Smith. He was a titular head of the thing from start to finish. And the real power behind this was really an evil man named Boss Lilford. He was the richest man in the country. He was the biggest farmer and rancher. Give you an idea of the character of this guy. One was tobacco farms. The Africans weren't working hard enough and fast enough. He threw one into a tobacco oven furnace and burned them up. And his son went to prison. His son took the weight for it. But anyway, he was the power behind the throne there. So this thing went on, gradually degenerated, and became a bigger and bigger war. There were two major tribal groupings in the country at that point still, the Matabele Nation and the Shona Nation. The Shona were represented by ZANU, the Zimbabwe African National Union, and its military wing, the Zimbabwe African National Liberation Army. And Matabele were led by Joshua Nkomo. ZIPRA, Zimbabwe People's Revolutionary something or other. ZIPRA was the army, Zimbabwe People's Revolutionary Army. Much better trained. They were essentially allied with the Russians. ZANU was hooked up with the Chinese. The ZIPRA wanted to have well-trained troops with conventional arms. They tried a couple of incursions, got their asses handed to them, and they went back to serious training and not much else until the very end of the war. And ZANU went with the Maoist idea, you got to win over the population, which they did by whatever means. And it was a horrible thing for the country. The first things they did, Rhodesia had the second highest Black African literacy rate on the continent, second only to South Africa. And the first thing they did was close down all the schools and the cattle dips. Ticks are a major problem. If you don't dip regularly, you can have all kinds of issues. They close them down, which certainly didn't particularly harm the Europeans, the whites, but it damn sure hurt the blacks in the tribal trust lands. So anyway, this went on until I got there in 1976. I left them with the United States in July 5th of 1976 on a 200th anniversary of independence. I left the next day. Got to South Africa, stayed with some people there for a while, and ended up in Rhodesia in August. Attested into the army, and I was told when I came into the Rhodesian army that if I was some kind of, Klansman or something, some kind of white supremacist, I'm looking for a refuge, I'd come to the wrong place. Even in 1976, they had accepted the concept of black rule. Now the fight was over how quickly it was going to come. So I did my recruit training with SAS, but I had an opportunity to go to the Gray Scouts. They knew about my horse background and my farrier background, with an immediate promotion to corporal, which probably would have taken 2 to 3 years at least in SAS. And with, if all went well, a promotion to sergeant in 2 months. So I went with that. I spent a good chunk of my time with the Gray Scouts as a farrier and teaching shoeing and all that, because I was reasonably accomplished when I got there in it. I also spent a spell training remounts, new horses coming in. They had a pool of, I think, 80 horses they needed to put through, and I got, they had, it was obviously a place where most of the horsey set went. And they started out with a commander who was really, he was a ex-BSAP, British South African Police, nowhere near up to running a regimental size or battalion size unit. Excuse me. The place had kind of gone to hell in a handcart, and I didn't see any hope. And so I went to the Selous Scouts, and actually they kind of recruited me because they had some horses and they needed somebody who knew something about horses. I went there for a year. The main problem was not knowing anything about horses, but knowing everything they thought they needed to know. They didn't know how to employ them properly. The first operation they tried is a mounted infantry operation. They put us in this rock pile. They wanted the horses barefoot so they could be possibly mistaken for local horses in Botswana, which was sandy. So in a few days, the horses were ready to go home. We had to go with them. I did a number of operations, did a number of column operations with them. They left when they did the Mapai operation in 1977, I guess. They left me with my mounted guys. We left the horses behind, and they dropped us off by the power line, where the power line from Cabora Bassa Dam goes to South Africa, and the road from Mapai to the border station. I'm trying to think of the name of it right now. To hold, at least try to hold the road open and let them know what was going on. And I said, how many are at this post? And his name's escaping me right now. But anyway, well, we don't really know. Give me a ballpark. Well, 400 to 600. And I think, well, 10 of us are going to do a hell of a job there holding back 400 to 600. So anyway, the operation was a pretty good success. They did lose a C-47 Dakota. Some Frelimo snuck in with an RPG and blew it up while they were loading up swag. So that was the only down part of the whole operation. And came back up the road and picked me up. We had a couple of minor adventures, but nothing of any real, one firefight and nothing really serious. So anyway, I stayed in the Selous Scouts for a year, and because I really didn't know what to do with these horses and how to formulate, how to plan operations, I really got to be the senior shit shoveler. I trained people, and they gave them to somebody else, and they got a new commander, the Grays, which was my parent regiment. I got tired of being a senior shit shoveler and said, let me go back where I can do something worthwhile here. And I didn't leave on particularly good terms with the command element. And so there is a book, which is probably covers a good 90% of Selous Scouts operation. Read Lieutenant Colonel Ron Reed Daly's memoir. And the 10% that's left out is anything that doesn't reflect well on him. So and went back to the Gray Scouts and functioned there as much really more in a support capacity. I did take my troop of remount riders out for, I think, a couple of weeks. I got back from that, and I found out I had hepatitis, tick bite, malaria, tick bite fever, and malaria simultaneously, and spent a few weeks in the hospital and a couple of months on convalescent leave. And overall, they thought they would tell you they had a unique war there. Now, some of the tactics you had to use were unique, and they developed a few. But there is no unique war. I mean, Nathan Bedford Forrest said the one who gets there first with the most men and most ordnance. So they were one thing they really they and the South Africans really had taped was mine-proofing vehicles. There, with all the crap that the Americans do, I look at these things and say you should really go see what they were doing 50 years ago in Rhodesia and South Africa. And it's essentially you take a rectangular cross-section or square cross-section armor plate container, turn it, rotate it 45 degrees so that you have a diamond shaped. This disperses anything coming up from the bottom, the mines, and it also is very effective for incoming RPGs. And we still haven't gotten to that. They just slather more crap on these vehicles, on these MRAPs. And I still don't think they've really gotten to where they need to be, because if an RPG hits a flat surface, you got a problem. It's going to do what it's supposed to do. The shape charge is going to be effective. The only hope you got is detonating it just before it gets there, or getting it, having it deflected. I'm looking at your picture here and I can't see it all that well, but I think it probably shows just about what we're talking about. So that was one of the things they did brilliantly. The mounted infantry, Gray Scouts, was never cavalry. It was mounted infantry. You rode the horses to the battle, and they were most effective as an economy of force operation. Once they moved in, the terrorists who could outrun them given a few days on a short haul could not. A man on foot is going to run away from a man on a horse usually, eventually, if he's fit. But that didn't help for the first few hours. And they fought the war very well. I mean, we talk about combat jumps. The fire force, which is mainly the RLI, the Rhodesian Light Infantry, were jumping sometimes multiple times a day, multiple combat jumps a day from altitudes under 500 feet. They didn't even carry reserves, because at that altitude, you would not have had time to deploy the thing. Why bother carrying it? They jumped in tennis shoes and shorts, and they had like a hockey player's helmet that they wore for the actual jump, got rid of. In fact, I fought 2 wars and never was issued a helmet, the steel pot. We didn't have them in SOG, and I guess maybe the Hatchet Force did, but Recon didn't. And they didn't even bother with them in the Rhodesian Army. Nobody had one. So we didn't have body armor or anything. I completely agree with their policy of not using automatic fire. Putting your weapon on group therapy was a chargeable offense if you weren't ordered to do so. And they were more interested in well-aimed fire. You double tap 2 shots on semi-auto. And I watch these videos of Vietnam, where these guys are holding these M16s up over the top of a berm or around a corner and just holding their finger down. All they did was waste ammunition. And let's see, what else? The fire force operations were very effective. They came in, the choppers actually hit the place they were looking for. And the fire force, the airborne people went into stops. And
could you speak a little bit about the fire force call-outs and the amazing use of the 2 helicopters? I believe one was used to drop troops, and then y'all had an airborne with a 30 or was it a 30 caliber covering y'all?
No, I don't think. Yeah, they had the Alouette choppers, the French choppers, and I guess they didn't. About the only thing was left was the original bottom frame. Everything else has been replaced over the years. And yeah, they went in. One was, there was a G car, I believe they call them, which was carried people, and a K car, which is a command via air, and they had some fire capability. I mean, nothing like a Cobra or even Huey. It's not the Delta, the gunships, the original Huey Slick gunships, but nothing like that. And a lot of these people they found some came from information from the locals via the police. Some were picked up by troops just working in the area. And some, a lot of them were done. This is where Selous Scouts came in. Their real stuff wasn't what they got all the publicity out were these column operations in Mozambique. By the way, pretty much the Selous Scouts dealt with Mozambique and SAS dealt with Zambia. So that was where your special operations people went. With a certain amount of with the Zambezi River in between, it wasn't feasible to use mounted operations into Zambia, so and Lake Kariba and all that. So and the Greys operated quite a bit in Mozambique, southeast, going across the border from southeast Rhodesia into Mozambique. And the place that I'm trying to think of, the border town, I'm trying to think it was Malvernia. You probably find that on a map. But yeah, and the Selous Scouts went in. The main thing, the important thing they did that you didn't see were these clandestine operations. We're all trained after you did your selection. If you passed it, you had training in how to essentially present yourself as a terrorist. And it was one European commanding, command and control on the ground, almost always out of the operation itself, and African soldiers, who've been trained to act like terrorists, who'd link up, find them, and then the fire force would come in and get them. And just a sidebar, 85% of the Rhodesian army was African or colored. And over there in this country, if you have any black in you, even if it's just a little bit, you're considered black. Over there, you're not. To be considered black or African, you have to be able to prove your tribal lineage, because there's a lot of benefits that accrue to somebody who can show this. Just as our First Nations here, you're not subject to conscription or taxes. And I think every African male got 8 acres in the TTL of his own when he turned 14, which reverted, I guess, on his death. But and the others, did any American who wasn't familiar with the situation went on and saw would think they were black. Well, no, they weren't. They were colored, and they were subject to taxes, conscription, So they might not have really enjoyed first class status. And it got really ridiculous in South Africa, where everything was graded. Your levels of status at the top of the Europeans, followed by the Orientals, and they made Japanese honorary Europeans because the Japanese didn't like getting treated as anything other than first-class citizens, and they really needed the Japanese. So they were honorary Europeans and could stay wherever they wanted and go wherever they wanted. And behind them came the Asians, and then the coloreds, and then the Africans. This was in South Africa during apartheid. So, and one thing that has to be said about Rhodesia is they did more in resolving race relations in 10 years in the American than we as Americans did in 150. And anyone who's left there after independence was somebody who wanted to make it work. And Bobby Mugabe came in, was elected, and just really destroyed the whole thing. And every shot they had at a decent nation, a viable nation for anybody. It's tragedy. Had so much potential, and one man and his cohorts put an end to it. Militarily, the weapons of choice, they started out with the FN, which is not a good weapon in the bush. I don't like it, period. I think they're unreliable. And when I was doing my initial training, I needed 3 of them to get one to fire well enough to qualify. That doesn't give you warm, fuzzy feelings about them. And they have gas settings on them, light, moderate, and knock your shoulder off. And you had to keep them on knock your shoulder off all the time, or you couldn't count on them. I didn't feel you could count on them. And they eventually went over to the Heckler and Koch G3. I don't know how many. Selous Scouts had some of the H&Ks that they got from somebody, I think from the Portuguese. And to me, they are the best main battle rifle that's ever been devised. They're M1 AK-47 level reliable. You can hide them in a swamp overnight. And I guess that's the one on the upper right there. And they have a delayed blowback action rather than a gas operation. So the perceived recoil is like about what you'd have with an M16 for a 7. This is a 7.62 by 51 NATO round. And you can fire them from horseback. You can't fire an FN from horseback. You'd be on the ground and knock off the damn thing. And they're that easy. They're a bit heavy compared to an M16, but you got all of the firepower of a 7.62 NATO round combined with a weapon that you can fire under any circumstances, and which is absolutely, reliable. And they use the MAG, which we have since adapted. I guess is the M240, MG240. That is the FN MAG, which we used in Rhodesia, which they eventually got over here. So, what else can I say? Very limited air. One of the advantages of the horses was a horse cost a hell of a lot less than a helicopter and a lot easier to come by. So we used a lot of those, and they were very effective. They really were. What else can I tell you? Very effective use of parachute operations in the fire force. I think SAS might have gone in a couple of times, and I think there was one Selous Scouts Halo op. And as to Americans over there, our swag was that there were about 400 to 600. And it was a mixed bag of guys who had been in special operations units in Vietnam, got out, very similar to me, and didn't settle into civilian life very well. And there were some newcomers. There were young guys. There were guys too young. They were so young that they missed Vietnam. And this was the only war they had available, and they pitched up, and they did a pretty good job. They ended up in the more conventional units like the RLI, the Rhodesian Light Infantry, and places like that. A few of them came to Gray Scouts. I guess a couple of them might have gotten to the Selous Scouts, which is a little bit of a tough nut to crack for a young kid who wasn't used to the country and, the conditions and all that. So, what are your questions? I've been talking here for 15 or 20 minutes now.
Oh no, this is what we're here for. Hang on one second. Let me clarify something. Jason, I don't know about the comment you're referring to. If you could type it out for me, please type it out. First off, I guess that's exactly what we're here for. Again, we don't know much about the Rhodesia side of things, and I'm glad you went into the history. That's exactly what we were hoping for, because I've read a few books. We know about Zipra and Zanla, but glad to hear you talk about it. But I guess to get started, because we don't have a lot of time.
Excuse me. Let me throw one thought in here.
Yes.
To understand the third world in general, you have to understand tribalism. The bad guys could have wrapped that war up 2 or 3 years earlier had they been actually been able to put a unified front against the whites together. And they could not. They spent more time fighting amongst themselves than they did fighting the whites. And that's why it was 1980 before the thing finally came to an end. And there's a very good book, Me Against My Brother, by a man named Scott Peterson. If you want to understand tribalism and all its ramifications, read that book. I recommend it to everybody.
Wow, you guys always ask me what books I'm reading. You just heard a great recommendation right there. That's one to jump on. And of course, we've got John Cronin's book, The Bleed. Gosh, I'm blanking on John Gartner's book about his time with the SAS, but you can look up John Gartner and it'll come up. But to first start off with a lot of information there, and we do have viewer questions, so we'll get it started. You mentioned, I believe, was it 1976? You officially got that Rhodesia?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. And did you say you had seen something in the Soldier of Fortune or had a contact that?
I just want to see Africa. I didn't go over there to join the Rhodesian army. When I got there in 76, this was right before the Soweto riots happened in South Africa. And it just wasn't much work. If I'd found something else, I might very well have done it. I had gotten to the point where I didn't have enough money to hang out. I had you can't go over there with a one-way ticket. You have to have a ticket home again. And if I couldn't have found something, and I didn't have enough money to go the tourist route, I was going to have to get on a plane from home. And so I heard I met this guy, very strange guy. I mean, he knew all about the Rhodesian army in depth, SAS and everything, had pictures of him in the SAS uniform. But I never talked to anybody who seemed to know him. So, but anyway, he was the one that pointed me where to go and how to do it and all that. And every bit of advice he gave me as to how to enlist and all that worked out well.
Wow, that is absolutely amazing. By 76, and that's one thing, as you mentioned, that keeps that does rear its head. It's the blacks, shall we say? That I know that all of this is going to sound weird to calling blacks, but Africans, because there are white Africans, black Africans, but nonetheless,
exactly.
And I'm over all this snowflakey liberal this softness. This is the way it is. Could you tell by the time you got there, before, as you said, you're wanting to visit and see Africa, could you already tell things were sketchy already between the races immediately when you got there, or was it slowly leading?
Yeah, South Africa was like people just walked down the street in Johannesburg staring straight ahead. People, blacks and whites, just kind of stared right past one another and walked right past one another. And the thing that pointed out the ridiculousness to me of apartheid and any kind of enforced racial separation.
Had to get the dog out. Sorry.
No problem. I was in Joburg. I had, in those days, you could carry something like 70 pounds of, luggage and all that on international flights, plus your handheld stuff. So here I was. I forget why I had to get into the rail terminal in Johannesburg, but here I was. I'd come from the airport and all that, and I had all this crap. I couldn't go in the door right in front of me. I had to go down the street to the end of the block, turn and go halfway down the block to the next one to go into the white door, the door where I was, blacks only. And so I had to walk an extra block and a half carrying 70, 80 pounds of stuff so I could enjoy my privilege of going in the white door, whites only door. But no, it was a whole different attitude. Rhodesia, completely different. Rhodesians, certainly the farmers, had their roots in the land. They'd been there for, most of them third, fourth generation at least. And a lot of them went back to the column, and all that. They worked side by side with the Africans. And there was, give you a little anecdote. When I was in the Gray Scouts, we had our horseshoes roughed in by a blacksmithing concern in Salisbury, or I guess it was Harare by then. And it was in the industrial sites, and there was an African beer garden down there. But anyway, we got there fairly late, and I hadn't had lunch, and I was hungry. And a lot of these little carts that the bakery sent out with, sausage, pastries, and stuff like this that you could make a light lunch out of. So I went looking for one, and they'd all sold out and gone back. And I saw one guy who was just selling pastries, like buns and stuff. And now, is there any place around where I can get something to eat? They said, maybe the beer garden. So I'm thinking, do I want to go in with a bunch of drunken Africans? And at this point, this was fairly late in the thing. This was 79, early 80s, something like that. The handwriting was on the wall. But I had my Colt Combat Commander and an extra magazine or two. So I said, I guess I can get out of there. The only problem I had getting out of this place was not sitting down and drinking with all these guys for the rest of the day. So, blacks and whites work together. And maybe not at, the white collar level, but the stuff that got done was done by people working together. And I've eaten sudsum and yama out of hubcaps with an African crew, because we couldn't go someplace to get to a restaurant and all that. So it was a completely different situation. It had every potential for a happy outcome. And it never saw that happy outcome because of Robert Mugabe and his people. Not he was abetted by the Carter administration and the Brits. The Brits just want to get out of the whole mess because it was making them look bad. And the Carter administration was what it was. So, left-leaning, maybe not quite
weak
as this bunch. I'll give this. Jimmy Carter was a well-intended fool. We now have a fool.
He was a good man that was way out of Jimmy Carter. I mean, he was a good man way out of his depths.
I mean, and look, you got to put Bush 43 in that category too. I mean, just a bit out of his depth when the shit hit the fan. He really was, and took some bad decisions we've had to live with ever since. So you don't try and impose a modern Western participatory democracy on people's idea of bliss as 5th or 6th century theocracy. It's just that simple. You're not going to do it.
That's, I mean, couldn't have been more well said. I mean, just absolutely succinct and to the point. I really was astounded to see, as you said at the beginning, you were, when the people coming over there saying, this isn't the bastion for white supremacists and skinheads and all of that. And, that's the main line. And guys, we're about to get into some action. We're not all going to talk race relations, but just to put in perspective, I mean, that's all you hear from the Rhodesian or from the media, shall we say, and some of the history.
Crap. They told you to get on the next plane out if that was your attitude, or because you're going to get sent out sooner or later, and why work so hard in the hot sun? Because you're going the same way.
Absolutely. I think there's a viewer on us today that knows a few Rhodesian vets and a few quote unquote mercenaries that were immediately spotted and PNG'd out of the country because of their views and such. They were not looked upon well. And you Americans had to prove yourself as well.
You had to perform well. There's a guy named John Early, and I believe he was in SOG once upon a time, and I think he was at Lanvay when they got overrun. Never did quite as much as he claimed he did, I don't think. But but anyway, he acted like Yosemite Sam. They packed his ass out, and I believe he blotted his copybook once again on some kind of mercenary operation years later. So, but anyway, the people who functioned well there were well received for the most part. John Murphy had trouble with SAS. There was an operation that couldn't be done, and they tried to accuse him of cowardice. The Selous scouts grabbed him up and promoted him, and did very well. He went on to Recce, where he was tragically killed, I guess, in a training accident. So
that's I mean, with and you mentioned, because we've had a few interactions SAS will come up with. So your initial training, as you well, before with that, you're literally, are you met in Salisbury and ended up being talked into or enlisting there, or how's the
I
enlistment?
didn't have to talk me into it very hard. They just had to put the paperwork in front of me at that point. So
Wow. Okay, man. And so is that you mentioned a training course or a combat orientation course, and was that with the SAS you said?
I got there late and screwed up the selection, and I had to redo the thing, and that was when I was told, they invited me to go to Gray Scouts, and they did ask me to redo the course. So I guess they're essentially pretty happy with me, but there was a screw up, and it was on me completely. And then I went on and did the Selous Scout selection. And give you an idea of what this was like. Not everybody will tell you that whatever selection he did was the worst, but I really believe ours was about as bad as any that they ever had. They didn't feed. It was a 3-week selection, 2 weeks of tactical training and all that, and a week of find out just what you had in you. So you didn't get anything to eat for the first 3 days, and after that you got a spoonful of big kitchen spoon, full of sudsy, which is, think of grits cooked to the consistency of mashed potatoes, and a spoonful of tomato gravy. You got that every other day. Whatever else you could find, it was what you could scrounge. And so if you went out on a recon or something, there was a fishing camp not that far, and you get this like fish jerky from them. But that was to get you ready for the 3rd week. And meanwhile, you're running, problems, classes, PT, the whole 9 yards, range training, everything. And the third, I'm trying to think what they call it. Anyway, we did 100 miles map distance in 4 days. They weighed your gear, and they put rocks in it. They painted them. They brought different color paint for every selection, so that you couldn't bring a can of paint, dump the rocks and come back and paint some color. And you got, I don't know how many, excuse me, are familiar with the old United States Army and Marine Corps sea rations. Mm-hmm. And it was called a rat pack, and you got it's the equivalent of a sea ration pack, and you got one of those for 4 days. And you did, like I say, if you didn't screw up, and we started out with 100 or 105 African soldiers and 5 Europeans. We passed out 2 Europeans, Corporal Dave Hodgson and myself, and 15 African soldiers. And we ended up split into two squads for Endurance Week. I was called it Endurance Week. And I had some Africans said, "Oh, they've been there before. They'd done an earlier selection and hadn't made it." They knew right where we were and where we had to go. Well, all of a sudden we came on the stream that I knew was nowhere on the map I had looked at. And I said, "Whoa, let's stop here and look." So I finally got reoriented, put us 10 Ks at least out of the way. So we had to make up that. So what we put our feet down on the ground was 40 miles the first day. And like I say, it was 100 miles map distance in 4 days. And then the last day was a speed march up the Zambezi Escarpment with just your weapon and webbing. I think it was 15 Ks in an hour and a half or something like that. And I was doing this whole thing with a torn ACL in my right knee, and if I hadn't had a problem, I would have had one because I slid down this donga like a ravine and hooked it on a root going down and twisted around. So my knee looked like somebody stuck a softball inside it or something like that. And I got through it, and the last little bit, I was determined to do it. They came by with the vehicles, and I was going as fast as I could on this thing, hobbling along. And Ben Bolter said, Sergeant Major Bolter said, "Get in there, you're finished." I said, "No, sir, what all? I'm going to finish this damn thing." And I got about 30 or 40 yards away. Pookie Fiati, who later Color Sergeant Fiati, he was a detribalized Zulu, somehow gotten from Natal up there, and he was a big strap guy. He ran out, picked me up, threw me over his shoulder, carried me the last 30 or 40 yards of the speed march. So that was the kind of relations we had really between the Africans and the whites. It was respect and a good deal of affection. So
wow, jeez Louise. I mean, the training that you guys, and people, look back at not only the SOG, but when we put up Rhodesia pictures, everyone's like, good Lord, look how skinny these guys are, and no muscles, no tattoo. It's like, yeah, that's why. And they can also ruck, 40 miles if they've been having to E&E and not worrying about it. Meanwhile, you've got bodybuilders that are in SF and MARSOC and all that could barely get through 2 days of without food and all that because of muscles.
Any weight you put on, the ones who got the best musculature and all that are wrestlers and gymnasts and people like that who are really pretty strong. They don't throw a lot of iron around, but they haven't packed on a whole bunch of superfluous beef to do it. Mm-hmm. And that's what you need. Oh, yeah. So you don't need somebody that's 240 pounds in the bush anywhere. That's what happened with Baby Huey. I mean, he wasn't fat; he was just a big guy. Oh, yeah. And why it was such a struggle to get him recover his body when I was at CCC. Anyway, yeah.
Did y'all have big guys in Rhodesia? I mean, I know the Europeans were big, but
no, they were not. The biggest guy in the Rhodesian army was a guy in a Grey Scouts, Mark Wriothesley, the Wastrel, out of favor, second son of a British earl. And he was 6'7". He was the tallest guy in the Rhodesian army.
God almighty.
And there was another one. I remember the biggest guy on the national rugby side was 6'5". It was not, they weren't big the way we tended. Well, this country, I mean, I got at one point up to about 5'8" on a good morning. I was on the low side of average for my era and generation and all that. I mean, the average American male in 1950s was, 5'8" to 5'10" in that area. And so give you a pretty good idea how things have changed since then. And 6 foot was a big guy. That was like 6'4" today. 6-footer. There weren't that many of them.
I mean, you're a big guy. Look, you got some arms on you right here as well. I mean,
I've always kept fairly fit. At 83, I'm not quite looking like that, but I don't do too badly for an old man.
No, not at all.
So that was taken in 78 or 9, 70. I guess 78 after I came back from the Selous Scouts was late 78. And I was at the Salisbury Fair, agricultural fair. And we brought the horses in and we're doing a shoeing demonstration. We bring one horse in and do 4 demos, 1 foot, every few hours, easy day. And, it just as a recruiting thing. And I mean, the crowds we drew for that shoeing demonstration were amazing. We thought we might get a few people. We had standing room only for everyone for I forget, 4 or 5 days, I guess. So
Wow. I mean, I love that. Besides tiger stripes and some of the Vietnam patterns, I absolutely love the Rhodesian brushstroke camouflage. I've got some shorts like that I do
they're
jujitsu
good.
in.
My only beef with them is they are not the same quality as that ripstop stuff that the jungle fatigues were when I was in Nam. They will not take the beating those things did.
Okay. Well, that now makes sense because I see a lot of pictures of you guys coming out of the bush and stuff. It looks like you've been in a football game to where it's ripped off of y'all, knees
Yeah.
ripped loose and all of that. Let's see. We had a question from Mr. Greg Walker. Halo is going to come up in just a second, but this is from Jason, courtesy of Mr. Greg Walker, seventh group and prior guest. When you get Mr. Mike back on, ask him if he knew a Paul Frost, Selous scout, Vietnam veteran, combat medic. Paul was a friend of mine since passed. I have his numbered Selous scout wings. A good man.
I'd like to know when he was in there. I do not know him. I think I met Cronin briefly. The ones I knew best were John Murphy and John Early.
Okay.
So
maybe Jason, either privately, I'll get with Mr. Greg when we get done, and I'll definitely get his information for you because I would like to see if we could put that together.
I went to Selous Scout Center, I guess, around early 1977, and I was there just about a year. I came back to the Grays at some point, probably February, something like that, March of 78. And that's a pretty rough time frame. Some early 77 to early 78, and I was there just about a year.
Wow. With and kind of getting into the horse thing is interesting also. I guess let me ask a little bit about that because there is a question about Halo. With the horses, we just showed a picture of the guys going into combat. Was there was the entire unit, shall we say, horseback with some off-true what's it called? Non-mounted infantry troops with y'all, or were y'all going?
No. We were essentially mounted infantry. This really started with Nathan Bedford Forrest. His forces were not cavalry per se. They used horses to get to the battle, and you got off and fought the battle on foot. And the cavalry charges ended with the advent of the machine gun. Really, the last cavalry charge. In fact, Paul Okolovich was in it. He is a lieutenant in the Polish army. The beginning of the World War II was the last cavalry charge that I know of. And anything since then has been mounted infantry.
Okay. Wow. Did was there when y'all were on the horses? What was there any special training, shall we say? I mean, I know you guys learned to shoot on there, but was there something not necessarily combat oriented that you guys drilled especially on the horses?
Oh, I mean, anybody came into the unit, if he had a horse background, and the people were known. It's a small country, the horse people knew the horse people, and you minimize the amount of time you spent in equitation. But that was part of your training, was to learn to ride horses. Mm-hmm. They did it pretty well. I had Nick von Herden ran that, and he and I had a few differences. He thought everybody should sling his rifle and cross his back and hold on to the reins with both hands. And I said, Nick, you just haven't been in a firefight yet. But they really did teach him good basics. They took these, a lot of the European kids had never ridden a horse, and get some African kid from the TTL, and he be pretty sure he hadn't. And they, in a couple of months, would get him ready to go out and do mounted operations. And that includes proper maintenance of the horse and all that. So, but and it was Gray Scouts was the first unit which was truly multiracial in the sense that you had Africans ordering Europeans around.
Wow.
You think it wasn't a shock for some farm kid that came in there and had been running gangs of African laborers from the time he was old, practically old enough to walk, to have some African lance jack come along and slap him upside the head and say bad, hard things to accept to him. It was, but we really did. The African warrant officers were addressed as sir.
Wow.
And that did not happen in Selous Scouts. I mean, it was very much a two-tiered system.
Mm-hmm.
They had the African NCOs right up through Regimental Sergeant Major Marvin Gary, or RSM Marvin Gary. But he was addressed as RSM by Europeans, where the European, where RSM Pretorius was addressed as sir by all lower ranks. You think the top three or top E8s and E9s in the American forces would be addressed as sir there.
Wow. Okay. So yeah, there's still a little bit of, like you said, that two-tiered system going on. One more.
But I mean, it was ending.
Yeah.
You know, by the end of the war, it was ending, and shortly thereafter, it pretty much ended. So they were getting African officers, they were getting African warrant officers, and the squadron sergeant major Grays I had met him as they all in Selous Scouts all had noms de guerre. You know, the Africans didn't use their real names, and he was Sergeant Richard, I think, or Sergeant Arthur, one of those names. He was one of the cadre when I did my Selous Scout selection.
Wow.
And I told you about that first day. We're hiking up this track, and there was one African soldier I could walk in those days. I could cover some ground. And the troops were not getting too happy. We came up, and Osborne said something to me. I didn't know what it was. There was a lion that just crossed, and he could see it, and I didn't. We passed this thing like, 5 or 6 meters away on the other side of a bush, grumbling at us. All you could hear down the column, click, 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 click. As the safety is going. But we got to the RV. We made it on time that night, and the Africans got talking to Sergeant Richard, I guess. Sergeant Major, I later knew was Squadron Sergeant Major Pongo. But anyway, I didn't speak any Shona at the time. They jabbering away would have been Shona, and the only thing came out that I could understand was 7.5 Ks on the map in 1 hour.
Holy cow! And there's going to be a question coming up about some animals and such. Actually, I think there's one right here. I'll be anxious to see what you think about this. Mary Jo, great supporter of the show. She says, can you comment on the use of animal guides? David Land's book, Guns and Rain, tells of Selous Scouts studying Shona shamanism to learn animal omens, especially of the eagles and hyenas. Amazing stories.
I spent a year there. Now, I did not get involved with the troops, the ones who did the pseudo operations. I never saw any of that.
And before we go any further, sorry to interject, could you explain real quick for those who don't know what a pseudo is?
The pseudo operators were the ones who went out and pretended to be terrorists. Essentially, they carried, complete terrorist weapons, garb, and all that, and tried to hook up with other terrorist gangs and set them up for the fire force to come in and get them.
And
pretty effective. And as I say, the other thing they were able to do was stir up a lot of tribal division between the Zipra and Zanla forces. Phony operations where they pretend to be one and attack the other, and that was one of the reasons they weren't getting together too well.
Those were, and I believe Mr. Gardner and Mr. Cronin mentioned some pseudo ops in their books, and some of the ones that are pulled off are absolutely amazing at them getting to kind of fight each other. And here's a picture of an American in pseudo dress with his counterpart, and you talking about two men that are close is the American with the one African, Mr. John Gardner got very close with his African counterpart during pseudo ops. I mean, it's literally your only other lifeline.
It really is. I mean, you're stuck up there, usually up on a goma or something, up on a hill, with a radio, and you rely on your African team for a month, 2 months, whatever you're out there. They got to bring you food, water. They're doing all the real operating. Mm-hmm. Every so often, a European, and some of these guys were amazing on their capability. For most of the Europeans came off the farms, their first language was not English or Afrikaans. It was whatever the local dialect was. Mm-hmm. And some of these guys, Robbie was interrogating a Shona, and he ran the Shona out of dialects. The Shona prisoner kept changing dialects, and he knew more dialects than the Shona did. His brother was Andre Robbie, who was one of the founders of the Selous Scouts. And so some of these guys spoke proficient Shona particularly. But if they were from Matabele land, they probably spoke Sindebele. So wow. But it really was. I mean, and for the Afrikaners, people of Afrikaner lineage, a lot of times English was their third language. They learned probably the local dialect first, Afrikaans second, and eventually they got around to learning English. So
the amazing, and I didn't realize. I mean, I knew there was a lot of dialects going around, but when you mentioned the 20 different of was it Shona or the Mtabele dialects or Shona dialects?
Sindebele was more, I think, of pretty much because it was a smaller group. Yeah. I think it was more, and there's a whole thing. I mean, it take the whole time we're devoting to this to go
yes,
through,
sir.
The way this collateral succession that the Shona tribes had. Essentially, there were 7 main groupings, each composed of a whole bunch of subdivisions. And when the paramount chief died, they had to get together. And this is where the Nangas, the medicine men came in to determine. And they considered, the spirits of their ancestors were an ongoing thing. I had to deal with this in the Great Scouts with a very good, well-educated African apprentice in a farrier shop, high school, some kind of missionary education, secondary education. They got to the point where they just said, "Hey, these Africans, if they have a high school education and they're working in the European economy, they're not going to skive on this whole business of tribal lineage and all that. If they got that, they're going in the army. Same colors and same as the whites." So got one of the first bunches there. So
wow, that's how long, and we're about to hit the viewer questions because we're at hour 3. We're not we're getting close to our limit, but we still got enough time to hit the questions. Before this great viewer question, how long before you started picking up the dialects or the languages of the men you were around?
I tend to get some fairly quickly. It's always workplace. I mean, I speak workplace Spanish. I spoke when I was in Vietnam, when I worked in the 2 shop, I got to where I could do the whole questionnaire side of a debrief of an Arvin team without a translator.
Wow.
And so, I can dabble a little bit. I speak German fairly well.
Ooh.
And I got a little bit of Afrikaans, a little bit of, I haven't used it, and I haven't used Vietnamese in 50-something years. So I still got smatterings of it, though. So
I enjoy y'all doing that.
And one of the problems, there were 2 main, even in Shona, there was if you know what Swahili is in Kenya and East Africa, there's a lingua franca that everybody speaks. In the Sudan, it's Arabic. You get out in the boonies, everybody speaks Arabic out there. Mm-hmm. And whatever their tribe is, whether they're Arab or not, they speak Arabic. Yep. And the one in Southern Africa and Rhodesia, what they call Chalapa-Lapa or Fanigalo, it's a lingua franca that started out in the mines because they get people from all over southern and central Africa. And it was useful to know. I really would rather learn, call it textbook Shona or something. I think would have been more useful to me. But anyway, I got to speak some. I got a little bit off of ones.
I enjoy hearing y'all Afrikaans.
There's a lot of resentment among the Afrikaans speaking people because I bet Omar was in the British concentration camps in Boer War. This is a living memory of what was done to them and how perfidious Albion has treated the Afrikaners for hundreds of years. They got to Southern Africa first, and actually they were there. They got a very legitimate claim to most of South Africa because they were there before the Bantu migration got there.
Wow.
The only ones who were there were the Bushmen and the Hottentots. When they got there, Van Riebeck and that bunch got to Cape Town in 1605 and set up a settlement there. It was mostly to service their ships going around Cape Good Hope. But yeah, and I knew Afrikaners who could trace their ancestry back to the first settlers in 1605. So to tell them that they don't have a right to some of this land is you're not going to get a bit of resentment.
Their folks are like the Pilgrims landing at Plymouth Rock.
Yeah.
Wow.
Earlier,
yeah. Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
Yes,
sir. Yes, sir. Wow. That's amazing. That's why we love hearing from you guys, and especially those of y'all that continued in the military and went other places because we're so pigeonholed on Vietnam because of how much we love it. But there's a lot of the same stuff going on in Africa and you're getting to inform us and describe things for us, which is just wonderful. This is a great question. Mike, were there many Rhodesian military men that were POWs? If so, were they held in Mozambique?
No. There were some people held in Mozambique, but they were not military. There is a very good reporter. I don't agree with her politically on a lot of things. I'm trying to think of her name. She eventually ended up with the Los Angeles Times. I think she's still there, Washington area one. Robin Wright was her name. A very brave and determined reporter whom I got to know a little bit over there, and she had spent some time in a Mozambique prison, but these were civilians, not military. I can't recall hearing of any Rhodesian security force who became a POW.
Wow. There was one operation.
Excuse me, there may have been, I'm not recalling it, and I have to think if somebody did, they'd have had some kind of operation to go in there and get them out.
I was just fixing to say that. Mr. Bill Cronin was on not a singleton. It was him in a pseudo operation with his counterpart, and I'm blanking on the counterpart's name where I already mentioned it. They had met up with a an SAS group,
right.
Raided the village that they had gotten recon on, and the K car came in, shot up everything, He gets wounded. They think he's dead. They then think he's captured because some of his stuff has been left on the ground. He was captured. They were hauling him off into the woods, and they immediately jumped off the aircraft that had just come to pick him up, take him back across the border. They run, kill the terrorists, and immediately get him out of effectively he was a POW already and grabbed him.
Well, until you get to a rear holding area, you've been captured, but I think real POW status comes when they've got you someplace where they can interrogate you and all that. So,
did y'all get, and would that even have been classified for y'all as POW status, considering this was almost SOG-like, or were y'all?
No, you couldn't keep something like that quiet.
Okay.
If someone was a POW. I mean, they might have been written off as killed or something like that, but I didn't, and I was in with enough people, I would have heard about it.
Yes, sir.
Absolutely. And I just don't recall hearing. Now, that doesn't mean it didn't happen, it means that I don't recall hearing about it, and I can't speak to it very well as such.
Absolutely. Thank you for clarifying that. Mr. John Cronin, we spoke to not too long ago. He described a very busy daily routine of jumping, maybe 5 times a day. Can you describe a normal day and maybe a more strenuous day for you?
Well, the first thing is I never got into para operations. They weren't accepting American jump school. You had to do their school. Matter of fact, John Early wrote the training plan, the Halo training plan for the Rhodesian army on a napkin, I believe.
That's what I thought.
Which they used. He had his good moments. But no, I never jumped with the Rhodesian army. And the days I had were, just some of the operations I did were mounted and all that. And, we rode those horses, 24, 36 hours straight almost, with a break for them to, piss and eat. And that's about it. And we carried these cubed rations, concentrated rations. And they got that once a day. The rest was what they could grab, off the felt as the felt grass as they went along. So the horses had to be as tough as we were. And like I say, most of the operations I did were mounted operations. So I did that selection. I never did anything as strenuous after that in the rest of my Rhodesian military career, I'll tell you right now. So
that's a testament to the training and just getting in. Like you said, people thought they'd come down there and just be a mercenary and do whatever they wanted. It's like, no, the Rhodesian don't play that game.
There were a few around. I mean, some came, they were hiring cattle guards, to protect against rustlers for a while. And they paid them next to nothing, enough to live on. They're supposed to get a big bonus if they got any. So the first time, and Boss Lifford, I told you about, hired a bunch of them. So the first time they got some, said, well, here they are. Where's our bonus? He said, get stuffed. And they never did get their bonuses. Nothing they could do. He had too much power in the country to try and do anything about it. So,
in there for a change, didn't they? And there's a question that may come into this because actually we'll ask it and I'll tie into it. Al was curious, did you have interactions with Mr. Jim Boland while in Rhodesia? He definitely was over there as an independent contractor. I'm not sure of the year, but he says 76, 77.
I do not recall the name. I did meet a couple of people who were in this and that.
He was another SOG man from down south at CCS.
If he was SOG, I would have recalled it because just the fact that he was in SOG would have stuck in my mind. I did meet some people, and they weren't all Americans either. Some, from here and there. Some French showed up there, ex-Foreign Legion people. So.
Oh, okay. As a matter of fact, here you go. I had this photo signed that he sent me. Here's Mr. Jim and Tom Cunningham, another SOG man well, I apologize, guys. I'm trying to here it is. He was actually featured in a Soldier of Fortune, which, as you mentioned, really was getting all the American guys that wanted to try and be something out there. There's Tom Cunningham of CCN and Jim right there of CCS.
Okay. I think I knew Cunningham from training group. I didn't know him in Nam. Like I say, most of the people who did that O&I course ended up in SOG. None of them ended up on A teams as junior intel sergeants. And it seems to me he hung around in training group with Weasel Halpin and a couple other guys. They were always getting up to mischief. Special Forces training group story. These guys were ghosts. They had ways of sniveling out of class, and they got caught. And they were in Delta Company, which was commanded at the time by one Captain Billy Joe Turner. He was this big strapping guy, and he was never going to make major. He had so many DRs, and I want to tell you one Billy Joe Turner story. He'd been at a barbecue, and he asked for a steak rare, or something. It was way overdone. And he went back and said, listen, I asked for rare. This is way overdone. I have another one, please. The guy said, go pound salt. And Billy Joe said, you think that's well done? He picked him up and set his ass on the grill and cooked his ass. Well done. But anyway, they got caught, and the first sergeant, and at that time we were doing op orders. And he said, what you guys want to do, make sure that you only made up the work. This was the first sergeant of the Delta Company training group. He said, you formulate a plan for a POW snatch on Captain Turner. So they brought it to him, and he looked at it, pretty good, implemented. He said there were footprints on the ceiling at Captain Turner's office, and they never did secure them. So, now, and I think Cunningham might have been mixed up in that.
Mr. Tom, if you met him or remember him, you should it should stick out very well, because he actually his first mission across the fence with Louisiana, I believe his left leg below the knee was blown off actually by an RPG round. Yeah. So he
survived it and came back.
He survived it, came back, was in the S2 shop, and then finished and decided to try and get a little more work down in Rhodesia bounty hunting with Mr. Bolin.
Okay.
And still alive, doing good. I actually spoke to him not too long ago, so doing good.
Ask him if he was in training group in 68, fall and winter of 68.
Fall and winter of 68. Tom,
and if he was in, and ask him what company he was in.
What company? I can do that. I will do that today as soon as we get done. Okay, let's see. We've got a few more questions, and I think we're going to have perfect timing here because we just hit the hour 15 mark. Sorry, we're rushing, guys, because Mr. Mike's got something to do, and he's been gracious enough to give us his time today. Martial Science, Cronin served in the RLI as an officer. He was forced recon, yes, in Vietnam, but wanted to put his training as an officer to task with the RLI. Yes, absolutely. Mr. John is a wonderful, wonderful individual. Good man. Did you use your mounted soldiers for any screening operations like the old CAV?
I'm not sure what they mean by screening operations. What they were, basically, they went out and just covered the country looking for people. They had trackers, every unit, even right down to a small, what they call a stick, a fire team, or they call a squad, a section there. Everyone usually had a tracker with them. They found somebody, they got on them and followed them. But like I say, it was mainly an economy of force operation. They did have some combat ops. I don't mean to deny it. But their main effectiveness was just they put them into an area and they just effectively shut down 50 or 100 miles of border. So just by their being there, because the terrorists did not want to get chased by the horses.
He may pop in and let us know if he's got something more specific, but I think that pretty much sounds exactly what he was wanting to know. This is later, I believe. True statement. No one populated South Africa, and the whites have a legitimate claim and a legitimate tribe, not a convenient factor for a lot of snowflakes. Yes. Absolutely, Marshall. Jason, favorite. I forgot to ask you about this when we spoke privately, but how much scrounging, even though we did speak about y'all's ingenuity, how much scrounging was going on in Rhodesia? It seems like you SOG men had perfected the art of scrounging gear, food, and vehicles. Anything like that?
I mean, give you an idea, and it wasn't just SOG people. All right, Reed Daly came to me and called me down to the headquarters, and I went down there, and I had a saddler and 2 IC named Richard Games. He was a corporal, and he come over from Gray Scouts also. Very good saddler. He was just a Rhodesian farmer, but he liked all that stuff. And all down, they said, we found a location in Mozambique, a training camp, and we want to hammer them. And the idea was they're going to go in with the long barrel Hotchkiss brand 81 millimeter mortars, which had a 1,500 meter advantage over the Eastern Bloc 82 millimeters, shorter barrels. And what you said, what we want to do is go in and with these things, just hammer the bejesus out of them and get out. You know, just boom, 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 throwing tubes down, rounds down the tube. And they said, can you make up a pack saddle that will do this? And I said, I should think so. And let me talk to Corporal Games. And he said, sure, you know, you just use it. We had, they took the McCullen saddle, which the United States Cavalry developed, and they made the trees out of fiberglass locally and made all these saddles locally. He said, yeah, you know, we can base it on that. And we had 3 pack horses carrying, I think, a regular pack saddle with, I'm trying to remember how many rounds each one carried. A lot more than you'd want to carry on your back of 81 millimeter ammo or mortar ammo. We went in at night. This was during the rainy season. We based up in a tea plantation down the southeast on the Chimanimani forest area. And we went in at night, and I went back to talk to Corporal Games, and I said, yeah, we figured we could put it together in, you know, a matter of under a week. I think he spoke to me on Monday, and he said, how long will it take? I said, I think we can have our end ready by Friday. And they couldn't believe that. Well, we did, and it worked out very well. I still remember the horse. He looked like a miniature Budweiser horse. He had some Clyde in him somewhere. Blaze, he had a big Blaze face. And when he came back, he came over to Gray Scouts after I'd gone back. Nobody touched Blaze in the farrier shop except me. He was my buddy. Jumping, you know, streams and all that at night with 81 millimeter mortar complete on his back, you know, base plate, extra long tube and all that, and tripod and all that. The biggest problem we had during the rainy season was digging the base plate out when we were finished. You know, that thing got pounded well into the ground, but we found out we had a pretty good kill ratio from that thing. So that was off the wall sort of stuff that we did. All this mine proofing was done. It wasn't done by Americans. It was done by the locals. They are very adept over there. They had learned to cope because of the sanctions and all this. So I don't think it was all that much that the Americans brought to that. And they could scrounge too. I mean, a lot of the stuff with which the Rhodesian army fought was scrounge stuff that they got through less than totally legal by international law means, because nobody was supposed to be supplying us. I don't know just where they got the G3s that they used. The first batch were terrible. They had really cheap plastic stocks on them. You come down to order arms and the stock could shatter on you. But they got that resolved, and they made a very good weapon for the rest of the war. So, but I don't know where these were made. They weren't made by Heckler Koch ones we got. The original ones that the Selous Scouts had were. We got them from the Portuguese. But the others that they were having made, I don't know where they got them made, but I guess you'd have to call it scrounging, because it was, you know, other than totally legal means that they had them made and all that.
So that's, I mean, just as you said, when we were speaking, gosh, it may have been Monday, when we were talking about, and you covered a little bit about the V-hole designs and all of that. I had no idea until speaking to you and reading some of the books that even the tires weren't air or anything. They were filled with water to also minimize the risk.
Augment the air, to soak up the explosion.
Where'd that idea come from? I mean,
I really don't know whether that was probably South Africa, very possibly South Africa. They were in a lot of ways the brain trust. But you talk about scrounging. Okay, when we did this bridge blowing op. And John Murphy came to me, and I wasn't going on the op. I was going to stay back and shovel crap and, the Como barracks. And came to me, he said, Mike, he said, you know how to drive it. He knew damn well I knew how to drive trucks and all that. He said, you know how to drive a truck, don't you? I said, yeah. Why do you ask, John? He said, well, I might be able to get you on this op. Do you think you could drive that Scania that's parked down there, in headquarters there? I said, yes. He said, I might be able to get you on this op. I said, don't try to blow smoke up my ass, John. You can't get one of these steely-eyed Rhodesians who's competent to drive that thing who will. Because it was going to haul 7 metric tons of overage pentolite and gelignite down through Rhodesia, cross country at night, and then up this road. We split. We had 2 trucks. We had a Burlier with a load. I had 7 tons on mine, and they had 5 tons on the other. We split up. We held while the Burlier went south and blew a bridge. Then we went north, and there were 2 bridges. And the first one, we wanted to do it to get out of there because they could have caught up. Once we got that was any kind of mechanized or armored stuff coming after us. The second was a solid concrete, really well-built bridge, 200 meters long, and that was left as rubble in the river. We put most of that seven tons of explosive on there. To give you an idea of what it was like, nitroglycerin weeps out of whatever the matrix. Gelignite, same as dynamite, except instead of using a sawdust matrix, they use gelatin. And these boxes of dynamite were soaked, or gelignite were just soaked with nitroglycerin. You had to handle them. We got caught in a full flank ambush on the way there going up. These silly bastards, they put their ambush, anti-vehicular ambush, against the Selous Scouts column, 20 millimeters and twin 50s on the forward side of this hill. But it almost didn't help me because I got caught right in the middle of this thing. And I looked like Robert Mitchum at Thunder Road getting out of that killing. So getting peppered, that engineer officer who did all the demolitions was riding a shotgun. I was getting peppered with AK rounds. He was shooting out the hot brass and trying to drive my way out of there. And so anyway, we got to the second bridge. So fast forward 25 years or so, I was at when I was with JMC, which is a story for another day. There was a guy who'd been on the UN demining teams in Mozambique. We got checked. Oh, well, where were you? I was so and so and such and such. Okay, yeah. I said, he said, we did it up there. I said, you know this road that goes from here to there? I don't remember. Yeah, he said, yeah, we blew 3 bridges up on that road back in 77 or 70. He said, were you on that? He said, boy, he said, I always want to meet the guys who blew that one bridge. I've never seen a job like that before. We took a couple hours setting this thing up. I mean, it just, like I say, 7 tons of demolition on it. So I said, yep. Wow.
7-ton demolition job.
7 metric tons. I had a little bit left. And we were coming back. We found some Cat 631B scrapers, which we wanted to bring back. You're talking about scrounging now. And there was a D9. And they said, well, we can't bring the D9. It's too slow. But one of the 631s got stuck. They had to come back after it. And I wanted to bring the D9. I could have run the D9. I mean, enough to get it back. I'm not saying I could have cut any fancy grades with it or anything, but I could have gotten it home and towed out anything that they needed. Yeah.
D9 bulldozer, you mean? Or,
yeah. D9 dozer. Yeah. And so they left it. It broke my heart to leave something like that behind, but I think they got 3 631B cat scrapers.
Ooh.
You can look those up. And
yeah.
So yes, we did scrounge. And one of the things they used on these column ops, on this one particularly, they had the buses they used into the tribal trust lands. If you think of a cab forward Bluebird school bus, not with a long nose, with a flat front.
Mm-hmm.
And they had gotten a hold of one of these, from Mozambique on an earlier operations. They had the local company markings and all that. They had luggage roofs on the top, and they call it a Hessian burlap around the thing. You just pull a string and it dropped. And it was a 50 cal mounted up there, and a hole in the roof, and a metal table welded to the floor of this bus. And the thing was loaded with a troop of these, from the troops, the ones who did all these pseudo operations, some dressed up as nannies and everything. Somebody stood up on this table if we encountered any, road up there. And if they found anything, he just pulled a string, the Hessian dropped down, he opened up with a 50 caliber on him. So, plus all of a sudden, all these nannies are shooting AKs out the window. Yeah, so, we did a lot of scrounging and used everything. Something like that. Yeah, not quite that fancy, but no flashing lights on it or anything. Traffic didn't have to stop for it.
I was about to say, y'all had no need for the stop sign and flashing lights.
Right. Stop for discharging or loading children, right?
We've hit the point. We've got enough for 2 more questions, and then we'll let you go, sir.
Okay.
These are more or less if you knew someone questions. Do you happen to know of a Mike Watson of the Gray Scouts, or maybe will remember him?
No.
Okay.
I do not. There was one guy, he was a former serving United States Marine, was in the Grays. And there weren't too many Americans in the Grays.
Okay. Another American in the
He
Grays.
might have been. I don't remember this guy's name, but it might very. If you can find out whether he had been a Marine, United States Marine, prior to going over there, that was the one guy I remember.
Wow. I'll start asking if I believe that's Dan. I'll check into that. Soldier of Fortune question. Do you remember when Soldier of Fortune, aka John Brown, maybe he means Bob Brown, I don't know if that was his pseudonym, but came to Rhodesia and were basically told by the army to bug off? They ended up renting trucks, going looking for counter-terrorist ops, and claimed to have been in a couple firefights. Very laughable.
No, he didn't do anything like that there. I'm not sure what the circumstances were. He came back later, and I had swapped. I got a hold of, I located a Holland & Holland bolt action 375 with the factory scope mount and scope. And Bob Holloway saw that and commenced to slaver and whatnot. And he had really wanted it. And he had a 458, Winchester 458 Model 70. So I didn't need this Holland & Holland. I knew he really, this was his dream gun for him. He actually made a combat, main battle rifle sort of thing later, I guess. I don't think it ever really took off. But he wanted that Holland & Holland. So I said, all right, show you what a nice guy I am. I'm going to swap you this for this, pretty pedestrian Winchester 458. And I loaned the damn thing to Bob Brown when he came on a hunting trip. And he just left it with somebody. I almost got arrested because, they had a really solid weapons control. You could pretty much have what you wanted, but you better keep it under control. And this thing didn't come back, and I was on record with it, And I think about the time I was thinking about leaving, and I didn't want to end up in jail and, Salisbury prison instead of on a bird out of there because of this weapon. And I was I meant to trace it down and get it back. But I thought that was kind of irresponsible on his part, but I had talked to him many times on the telephone about these situations. So I think I told you I sat with my bags packed for a week in 75 to go to Mozambique. That thing fell apart. Fortunately, I never did get over there.
Jeez. We and speaking of did you do engineering? Did you have an engineering MOS?
When?
Vietnam.
No,
For no.
my primary was O&I. My secondary was 1-1 Bravo. And you flip those around, wherever there was an opening for promotions, that's what you became until you got the promotion. So,
Oh, okay.
well,
We
I was cool. I was 11 Bravo out of AIT, and I was Special Forces Operations and Intelligence. That was my SF training. I was that bunch that they decided to run an experiment, and yeah.
Secret Squirrel O&I stuff. Jason was curious because we've had Mr. Dan Sturr on, and they were talking about when Bob Bechtold and him were at Fort Belvoir doing engineering school. They ended up racing some of the bulldozer and messing up some of them.
I didn't hear that particular story, but I know Beckel said that. It wouldn't surprise me.
You want to hear it
Would
real
not
quick?
surprise me. They were. I know they were not loved at the engineering school.
You want to hear what they did?
What's that?
You want to hear what they did?
They just busted chops constantly.
One
big thing, they had some of these NCO instructors that, you talking with soil, it wasn't dirt. So just to aggravate them, to constantly, instead of saying soil, they said dirt. Just stuff like that. So they were, just forces people out amongst legs, and there's going to be problems.
Dan and Mr. Bob were told to not get on the not get on the bulldozer because they didn't know how to drive it, and then they asked some other guy to move it, and he really didn't know how to drive it. So Bechtold and them got it and a tractor, and they lined up for a drag race, and they drag raced two bulldozers.
I didn't hear about it, but I can believe it.
And one of them accidentally slammed down the front grader and like to have flipped the bulldozer front, and no more SF men on the bulldozers.
All right. Yep.
We did have you did have some more missions, as you mentioned, the JMC in Sudan, and did you have another project that you worked on that maybe if you'd have some free time next month, maybe you could come on and talk to, or do you think we've wrapped it up pretty much?
The JMC thing, and maybe my thoughts on politics and warfare in general, I'll find time for that. The only other thing I did after 9/11, they have a state militia when the National Guard was pretty much federalized in the 80s. Mm-hmm. The governors of all the states were able to have their own militias, which would take the job. It used to be the National Guard was under the control of the governor. The federal government, except in time of war, could not mess with them. Mm-hmm. When they started using them for this and that, then they allowed the governors to start their own militias. And we had one in Virginia, the Virginia Defense Force. And I had said, after going to 2 sets of war games and coming back with 2 silver medals and a bunch of scars and dead friends, next time I put on an I'm a tree suit, they're going to be coming up the lane. And 9/11 was close enough. So I went to join that. I was in that. In fact, I was in it when I was in Sudan. I was communicating with them, online when I was over there. And I, kind of a one-eyed man in the world of the blind for the most part. A lot of people would, when you went to the armory, we shared the armory with a guard. Back in that time, if you want to see a CIB, you better go to the Defense Force side. There were quite a few of us had combat experience, but really it didn't take too much to rise up pretty quickly through the ranks. I came in as a staff sergeant E6 and made E7 very, very quickly, and I made E9 command sergeant major before I left. So, but that was, the one time they really shone was Hurricane Isabel. They would have had the guards communications, the singers or whatever it is. It was too short a distance for them and too long for the 77s or whatever they had. And it was the Defense Force communications people with their own ham radios that provided in a couple of areas there, the comms that they had,
Wow.
operational comms. So, but that I don't consider that a real military thing. That was more
And
than anything else.
well, interesting and work towards the nation and helping people out nonetheless. If you'd like to, several people have already mentioned. Hopefully, there's another show or talk with Mr. Wilson planned. So, if you'd like to in August to come back and just talk with us about politics, warfare, some of the past two shows, we'd love to have you.
Yeah, I mean, I've got a whole list of dead friends, and I don't. You know, Clausewitz said war is just just an extension of politics, and so I've come up with some feelings over the years on it and what you have to do and all that. But somebody wants to listen to them, I'll be happy to be around and probably realistically it'll be after the 10th of August anyway.
That's more than fine. We've got some stuff lined up that'll keep me busy until the first of the month with some people coming on. So we'll plan. Go ahead.
Yeah, a couple of those people who I might have known, I just don't remember the name. I can't put the name you gave me with the face, particularly the guy in Gray Scouts. If you could just trace back there, find out if the guy in Gray Scouts had been a United States Marine and could chant cadence and all that. And a couple of the other guys in Selous Scouts, I'm trying to remember, but Cronin, I met him, and but any information you give to flesh out the character and all that a little bit, I'd appreciate. And if any people want to, don't be afraid. You know, if somebody is interested in some of this and you think it's a little too esoteric for this format, but they're interested, you know, give them my contact information, and I'll be happy to communicate with them.
I would absolutely do that. I will. If any of y'all want to, you heard it from him. If you'd like to speak to the man himself, you can. Michael Grogan here said he's RLI 2 Commando. What about the crippled legs?
Okay, yeah. Robin Moore came over there, and he bought a house, and he had this called his group the crippled. He was writing a book, which came out, and it was a little strong politically. And you can see most of us who were there at the time in there in one color or another. But you know, the names have been reworked supposedly to protect the guilty. But yeah, he did. He started this kind of group where we hung out a little bit there when we were in town. Very nice, treated us very well. The only problem that, of course, the American government was trying to snivel in. There's a guy named Vernon Gillespie, and he was
old school.
I forget what he claimed to be, but you know, he had spook written all over him, and not somebody to give a difficult mission. And you're just trying to get information on us. Well, we knew damn well that as soon as we attested into the Rhodesian army, the United States State Department knew who we were and we'd done it. But we didn't feel like signing our names or something. Like he was going around asking us all to sign something, and I forget what he said it was about, but it was accountability or something. You know, we're just where the sun doesn't shine, Vernon. You know, and we told Robin, if you want to see us, you get rid of him, and he wasn't around too much longer. So,
wow,
a nice guy. What he did, he lived 8 or 10 miles from my family in Connecticut. Oh. And he went back and he contacted my family and had them over and all that. And, you know, told me I was alive and well and not much different I was. You know, so I really appreciated that. And he was also a conduit if I needed something, you know, from the family. When he was going back and forth, he brought a few things for me.
Wow, I've heard a lot from some of the Rhodesia pages I follow about stuff going on with Robin Moore and some of the other guys, but that's he sounded like he was quite the character, especially there him involved with Mr. Vernon Gillespie as well, old
Yeah,
school SF man, old school.
yeah. Gillespie was just, he could have done his job better. Yeah, he kind of reminded me of a couple of dorks they had in the S2 shop at Khartoum. Made you understand where it's, when somebody said military intelligence was an oxymoron,
Sure, it
you
is.
understand why somebody came up with that. But we had an assistant S2 in Khartoum. I tell you, talk about being dumber than a sack full of hammers. I don't see how he could have gotten commission. I mean, you had to have a GT, I think, of 110 to get commission. And I don't think he could have cracked 100 on the best day he ever had.
Woo! We'll close out with this, but Marshall was saying, along with Robin doing all what he was doing, he had the house, or the unofficial American Legion house, to where he'd bring the Americans in for fun, barbecue, and drink, but would pass on info immediately to the CIA.
Oh, I mean, we knew that. The Rhodesian government knew that, and it's useful. I mean, when I was in the Sudan, we had the area intel officer was one of our. I'd have to explain the whole system to you, but we had the area intel officer for the uh, SPLA, Sudanese People's Liberation Army. He was their S2 for the area. Everybody knew it. We just used it. I mean, if I need to do some back channel stuff, yeah, we just get Captain Cody, and Cody run see, Commander Ibrahim, and tell him we really like thus and such done. And it got very quietly done. So yeah, everybody knew this. It was an open secret.
Wow. I mean, this is why we enjoy talking to you and learning, because again, we don't know all of this stuff about Rhodesia, and this is right up all of our alleys. And sadly, some of the people that are interested in Rhodesia have just come in at the very end. So guys, you heard August 10th, we'll definitely have another
Something
go.
like that. Just we'll set it up.
Yeah.
But just there's a story with that beard. I grew a beard when I did the selection. I really didn't like it. I've always been clean shaven, and the sweat tickles and everything when you got it. So I kept it for a little bit, and then I shaved it off. And one of the American TV news stations over there, and actually made the evening news in the States. We were talking, Michael in the army there. We saw him on CBS News or something. But anyway, I shaved it off. I didn't like it. But nobody in the States could ever imagine me having a beard. So I grew another one. I went, got the picture. As soon as I got the picture back and started to come out and all that, I went to the hotel and shaved the beard off. So that was the one time I've had a beard.
I gotta say, that's a pretty glorious beard you got there, sir.
I said it made me look like an Old Testament prophet or a predicant in a Dutch Reformed church or something like that. So,
wow, that is absolutely wonderful. If you're talking to Mr. Mike, yes, Dan, I can get you hooked up with Mr. Mike on Facebook, unless you're talking to Mr. Michael Grogan. But yeah, I can get you hooked up. All right, we'll be looking to connect after you get done and around August 10th, where we can have you back. For closing out today's show, anything you'd like to say before we shut her down?
Not really. It's tough. One of the things that's tough, I'd like to see some of the stuff that some of the Americans have written about it. I didn't write anything because I never kept notes on it. Particularly, I was in the Selous SCOUTS, was all pretty well classified. Same thing with SOG. I mean, you're getting the stuff, and not because people had a lot of information they might have had in a conventional unit that they could document. It's just memories. You're talking to me from my memories, not from what I had documented anywhere. And one of the problems with anything about the Rhodesian army that I've seen is it's like looking through the wrong end of a telescope. It's focused on, on a particular group. There's a very good book, Equus Man. I'm looking at it on my bookshelf right now. about the Gray Scouts, but it only covered one of the operational squadrons, and it had nothing. There were some people who did a lot of good things for the Gray Scouts and barely got a mention if they got any at all, just because these guys never got to see them or deal with them very much.
Wow. Man, oh man. That's why I'm glad we get you to where you can shine a light on some of these units, some of these men that us Americans may not get to know about. And we enjoy every time we get to speak to you. You've quickly become a favorite.
Well, but anyway, again, in a world of the blind and one-eyed man may be king, but that guy, that chap, Mr. Watson, I believe he mentioned, find out if he had been a United States Marine. If he did, I remember him, and he did a very good job by that. He was very well thought of in the race. So,
it looks like I think he may have just answered. Oh, he was a Rhodesian.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Now I got to scratch my head even a little more. Like I said, tell him to contact me.
Okay.
And we can talk about, which there was a territorial squadron, there was a regular and national service squadron. So I'd have to know which one he was in and what he did when he wasn't, in Como Barracks.
Dan's a Rhodesia. He writes history pieces on Rhodesia. So I will get his email to you or your email to him, so y'all can get linked up and he can ask you some questions, get things straight.
Okay.
All righty. Well, I think this was wonderful. I'm sorry we held you longer than we needed to, but we'll be looking forward to August 10th, and we thank you a ton for spending the morning with us and talking.
Well, thank you for having me. I really enjoy these things, and like I say, most of this it's almost like going to primitive people who don't have, a recording. You are making the recorded history of stuff that happened 50 years ago, and it's mostly you're going to have to piece it together from people's memories who were there. So wonderful that you're doing this, and as I said, I would love to see somebody do the follow-up on the people who are in SOG, what happened to them. And
that between talking to you guys and all the books that are starting to come out and have already been out, it's getting easier, along with Jason Hardy's books, starting to piece things together.
He is the nexus of all this. He did a fantastic job.
I like to say I'm a researcher. He is an actual historian.
I tell you, he gets serious as two dogs in the throes of carnal lust about it, doesn't he?
Oh,
I mean,
absolutely.
when he was doing the first book and on the overall history of it, and then when he got into the one on the teams, he really got into the weeds there digging. So very much impressed by his efforts.
Thank goodness he did, because that's helped me a lot learning about you men before I got to speak to you men. So yep, guys, just be looking for sometime in August, after August 10th. We'll get back and get Mr. Michael back and have him on to talk to us. But we're going to close it out today so he can handle his business, and I can get ready for our shows tomorrow. So everybody have a good afternoon, and we'll be in touch with y'all.
Thank you very much.